Angelo Gingerelli, strength and conditioning. I'm in my 50s. I was going to say late 50s, but yeah, I guess that's pretty true. Certainly past the half. Angelo is a strength and conditioning coach at Seton Hall University over 20 years. He's written 2 books. I open up with the question of, with somebody who's over 50 like myself, is strength conditioning just as important as aerobic or more important? Very interesting answer. But he's got a very interesting view on the student athlete going from high school to college and the difference. One day they're with, the student, boy or girl from high school is with their parents, their siblings, they're eating together. And within 24 hours, they're at a university. They got dropped off. They're, has a roommate that they've never met before. And, they're launched into this whole new world. And the demands for the university, for the college level athletes are so much more than the high school. Simply put, high school here in the States are girl and boy sports. In university, it's men and women. But it's a great conversation. Angelo is very dynamic, got a lot of great opinions. I do ask about, here in the States, we have NCAA college sports. Is it fair to the student athlete? We talk about transfer portal and name and likeness and getting back to what he knows best is strength and conditioning. He's actually written 2 books, one on finishing strong and the other on that transition, the 4-year transition from high school to college. It's really great insight. I enjoyed my conversation with Angelo. I look forward to meeting him face to face. The next 4 years is his second book. Thanks so much for listening.
Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because I was working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word, discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission? How do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision, growth through learning from others.
Appreciate your time today, Angelo Gingerelli. Is for people over 50 like myself, Angelo, is strength conditioning more important than aerobic?
Is this the show? We're recording already?
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm not really sure if one is more important than the other. I think both are super important, right? As we get older, we lose muscle mass, and most of the research is showing us that the bigger and stronger we get when we're younger, the better maintenance of muscle mass when we're older, better mobility, less injuries, less slip and fall, stuff like that, right? On the same token, if we don't train our cardiovascular system, that kind of falls apart on us too, right? So I think realistically, when you're younger than 50, like in your say 20s and 30s, you're getting a pretty good routine of doing strength training and cardiovascular conditioning. That might be running when you're younger, it might be the bike, it might be the pool. As long as your heart rate's elevated, I think you're doing a good thing. But they're both kind of important. So I think a lot of times, up until the last decade, we thought younger people lifted weights, older people walked, rode the bike, whatever it was, and that's kind of the way it was. What we found out research-wise was older people can get and stay really strong in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, but that doesn't mean that cardiovascular conditioning isn't important anymore when you get to that age.
Because the fear of many is that they don't want to get too big, they don't want to get too muscle. It's a ridiculous fear, isn't it? It's just a myth.
It really is. There's about 1% of our population that might happen for. The rest of us are going to need a ton of steroids, testosterone, growth hormone, perfect diet, perfect sleeping, perfect training, even to think about getting too big and muscular. So I think that kind of rumor's been dispelled the last couple of years. But we definitely see as people get older, the idea of being physically active and training their strength system in some respects is definitely a valuable thing to do.
So, Angelo, when a high school athlete goes to a big university, and what is the level jump from high school athletics to college?
Well, the biggest thing, to make it very simple to the lay person out there, in high school, even at the best high schools in the country, you're competing against boys and girls, right?
Right.
In the college level, you're competing against men and women,
Mm.
right? And if you look at it, it used to be you're an 18-year-old boy or girl, you made the jump. Now it's 21, 22-year-old men and women you're playing against. Now with the transfer portal and the COVID year and the
Mm.
grad year and the way things change now, you might be playing against kids that are 23 and 24 years old. They're not kids anymore. They're grown men and women. So at the very least, there's a big jump physical development-wise from an 18-year-old to a 23-year-old, and now that's your competition. The other thing we throw at kids all the time when they get to dress enough is in high school, you have practice, you have games that are usually within the county. Maybe if you're really good, a couple state tournaments, stuff like that. In
Mm.
college, we're traveling across the country a couple times a month easily, right?
Mm.
And there's no off season. The season ends, you get a week or two to recover, and now we're starting off season conditioning. We're in class way more than we've ever been before. Summer might be off, it might not be. If you choose to go home and take the summer completely off, you're going to fall further down that depth chart when you come back to school in August or September. So just a much bigger commitment across the board that starts on the playing field of playing against bigger, stronger, faster people, and then it extends to every other aspect of your life, from the dining hall to the dorm to your roommate to your professors. Just it's a great time in your life, but could be a hard, challenging time in your life. I think we got to do a little bit better job preparing kids to make that jump, not just always show them the good parts of it, which definitely exist, but there's also some things that could be tough or challenging, and the less prepared you are, the harder they are to excel at.
Yeah, I heard you say that, the high school athlete was the best in their high school, and they're sitting and having, sleeping and having meals with their parents and their siblings, and then the next day they're in some room in a new college with a guy or a girl they barely know, and everything changes.
Yeah, I don't know if you could pick too many days in your life where in 24 hours your life changes as much as it does the day you go away to college, right?
Right.
Now, being married is a big life achievement. A lot changes. So when your life passes away, obviously that's not a great thing, but everything changes that day. But when you think about a thing you can prepare for and get ready for, I don't think there's too many other days where you left the house in the morning, mom and dad dropped you off on a college campus, they go home, you stay, and the next
Yeah.
day everything's different.
It sure is. So you're a two-time author, but the next 4 years, the book that you wrote there, what do you want the reader to take away from that?
Here's the concept of the book was this. I've been at Seton Hall for 20 years, a couple jobs before that. I have a decent resume for someone in my profession. But the one thing I've seen every fall, no matter where I've been, what level I've been at, and after 20 years I've been here, kids just come in unprepared. And that goes
Hmm.
from McDonald's All-American basketball players to walk-on cross-country runners.
Hmm.
And part of it is at the college level, because of recruiting and the way that's so competitive, we're forced to sell a dream, right? We're going to give you X amount of dollars. We have this major for you. We have all these great facilities. We have a dining hall. We have a great coaching staff. We have all this stuff available to you, which is totally true. The cliche I always say is that I've been in this whole press run. Coaches that I've dealt with are not liars. They are salespeople, right? They're
Mm.
showing you the best thing they have, and all of that really exists. But at the same point, a scholarship is not a gift. No one's giving you a present. It's an exchange, right? It's a contract. We'll give you X amount of dollars towards your schooling if you give us X amount of time, effort on the field, the pool, the court, whatever it might be. So what I always say to young people and parents is this. When you sign your national letter of intent, actually just change the name. Now it's called a contract. When you sign that contract to play at University X in the spring of your senior year, you should have as much fun with that moment as you can. The odds you beat to get that scholarship, you beat out all of your peers. You didn't get injured. You stuck with it. That's a great moment in a family's life. I think it should be celebrated to the fullest extent. The next day, it's time to go to work. Too many people look at a college scholarship as a finish line, when in reality, it's a starting line for the next 4 years of their life. So I say put it up on YouTube, put it on Instagram, get all the likes you can, have a party at your house, live it up, and then within a reasonable period of time, a couple of days, contact the people you're going to work with at that school, figure out what's expected of you, and then do a honest analysis of where you are and start moving in the right direction. So the pretty big thing in college athletics now is kind of like conditioning tests. There's standards you have to meet to be on the team. So if you sign up to play at a school where a 6-minute mile is the conditioning test and the standard, and it's that's going to be September 1st and it's May 1st and it takes you 9 minutes to run a mile, well, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It means you got 3 or 4 months to figure it out and
Mm.
get on the level you need to be at. And I think one thing is we just got to kind of not hide, but we don't always tell people these things are attainable if you start training for them and doing them. I think why this podcast is a great thing is the whole idea of discipline, right? You can't wake up tomorrow and pass a conditioning test, but if you get a little bit closer every day for 90 or 100 days, you can definitely do that, right? So I think the biggest thing is just gradual improvement and an honest self-assessment of where you are versus where you have to be, and make a commitment to get a little bit better every day. The other thing I always say to people is those 100 days from when you sign that deal to play in college to when you actually go to college are arguably the best 100 days of your life. It's graduation, it's prom, it's going away parties. It might be a nice family vacation, right? It's a really fun time. So I'm not saying don't do that. I'm not saying, go to the gym instead of going to your prom. What I'm saying in the book is over those 100 days, dedicate 100 hours, 1 hour a day to improving your body, meaning physically ready, and you'll show up on campus better than most of your peers and most of your recruiting class.
Yeah, it's a very tough transition, that high school to college athletics. You mentioned that coaches are salespeople, but they raise funds through boosters. I mean, it's a tough job.
It's a much harder job than people think, right?
Mm,
Because I think you see a handful of people on TV making a ton of money, right,
right.
and winning national championships. But we realize, there's 300 plus Division I schools. There's 25 sports at some schools. We have 13 at Seton Hall, which is kind of like a lower number. But these people working, it's a 12-month a year job. Recruiting never stops.
Huh.
The transfer portal and the world we live in now with social media has made it even harder, where you have to go at your recruits, daily, if not hourly. And then again, it might be fundraising. It's kind of like being the CEO of a company, honestly. You're kind of the CEO of a company, the players are your employees, kind of the middle management and support staff, people like me, your athletic trainer, your academic coordinator, stuff like that. And then, it's incredibly competitive. We play in the Big East. You said you're a UConn guy. There's schools that we have schools that are contending for national championships every year. So, we're not a Power Five, but we had in every sport, we have 2 or 3 schools every year that are in the conversation to go to a national tournament and maybe be in a Sweet 16, Elite Eight, something like that. So it's not easy at all for anybody involved in it, from the coaches right down to the players.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and of course, UConn's basketball powerhouse. I mean, last 2 men's and the women's a strong program. And so, can you explain in simple terms, Angela, what the transfer portal is?
Okay, up until 2020, right? You signed a 4-year commitment, a national letter of intent that committed you to play at, let's say, University X for 4 years. Okay, in those 4 years, if you wanted to leave for any reason and go to another Division I school, you had to sit out a full year, and then you could start your career at the next college, University B, we'll call it, right? In the transfer portal, if at any point you're unhappy with your experience at whatever college you're going to, you can put your name in the transfer portal, and you're a free agent, basically. A coach can offer you a full ride, a partial ride, whatever it might be, but it's clear that you don't want to be where you are and you're willing to move on to the next thing, right? So in some ways, for the players, it can be a great thing, right? I always say for the first 50 years of the NCAA, the players had no power whatsoever. The coaching institutions had way too much power. So an example of that would be you're a 7-foot tall basketball player that's not real fast and mobile. The coach that recruits you leaves to take another job, right? The coach that comes in wants all small guys that run and gun, and there's nowhere for you in the offense. You were stuck in that place back in the day, and I don't think that was a good thing, right? Now that player can say, my services aren't needed here. They might be more valuable somewhere else. I'm going to go for someone that wants to play with my body type, my skill set, whatever it is. I think that's a good thing. I think that the problem we run into is a lot of kids they're not thinking long term enough, right? So if you're going to your senior year in college and you're not going to play a lot, but you're going to get a degree that sets you up for the next phase of your life, you got to weigh long term success versus short term happiness sometimes, right? So I always tell people, the transfer portal is a great thing. It can be a great thing, but if you go to 4 schools in 4 years and don't have a degree at the end of it, what did you really accomplish, right? Because almost none of us are playing sports professionally, and a degree is probably more important than any of that, right? The other thing is, if you're jumping school every summer, that means that summer you're not doing an internship, right? You're not meeting people in the field you want to work in. You're not getting ahead for the life you want to live when you're 30, 40, 50 years old. So again, I think if you're a football or basketball player and you can make a lot of money and get some eyes on you, go to the NBA or the NFL, that's probably the right decision, right? If you're a swimmer, a softball player, a baseball player, and your future is in profession X has nothing to do with sports, then you probably want to look into a major that gets you in profession X and maybe raise you up the pay scale and the career ladder a little bit quicker by doing that the right way.
Is the NCAA fair to the college athlete, student athlete?
I think it is more fair now than ever before.
Mm.
I think it was unquestionably unfair until the last 5 or 6 years, right? I think that's fair to say. Well, I think, let me rephrase that for a second. What sports are we talking about? Because we're talking about football and basketball players that
Mm.
fill arenas and sell jerseys and beer and food and national TV contracts, and they get a meal plan at the end of it. Definitely unfair to those guys, right?
Mm.
Is it fair to your tennis players, your golfers, your swimmers that get to travel and play and train in first class facilities and get their school paid for? Yeah, it probably was fair to them.
Mm.
So I think it's a case by case basis, but I think you had a situation where there's two sports generating a ton of revenue and the players weren't seeing any of it. And then you had another, let's say 15 sports that were not generating a lot of revenue and the players were reaping a lot of those benefits. So I'm not sure if it was unfair across the board, but it was definitely unfair to the guys that were selling tickets and T-shirts and jerseys and on commercials for the school. The joke I always make, we had a really good basketball team here 4 or 5 years ago, and we had 3 players that were really, really good players, and they were nice guys, and they were everywhere in New Jersey. They were on billboards, they were on buses, they were on T-shirts, and they just missed the NIL era. They couldn't get paid for it, right? So I would pull up at a red light next to a bus and see 3 guys I work with every day and be like, oh, I know those guys. And I used to joke around with them nonstop because I was too questions. Like, number one, how are you guys not getting paid for this, right? Number two, who is photoshopping these pictures? Because none of you are this handsome in real life. But I used to joke around with them all the time. And now in this era we live in now, probably a little bit better, the guys should be compensated for that, which I think is fair.
So you think that NIL, the name and likeness, is a good direction to go? It's not perfect yet.
Exactly. We're knocking on the door of straightening out a system that's probably unfair for too long. But it's the Wild West right now, for lack of a better term. And it's just things change, right? Economies change. I know your background's in IT. When a new technology comes out, nobody really knows how to regulate it or what to do with it, right? And like most things, the technology and the culture moves faster than the governing body does. So we're trying to catch up and trying to make it work for everybody. But I know for a fact, I work in an environment now where 6-7 years ago, guys were on TV twice a week and selling out at the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey, didn't own a car, and now parking a parking deck next to our players. That's some pretty nice cars. So I think they probably deserve it. I think it's probably a more fair way to do it. And I think it's probably going to change a lot in the next 10 years and might look completely different. But right now, I think we're trying to make some good progress.
Did the NCAA want to do it, or did they have to do it?
You know what? I'm not really sure. I don't know. And one thing I think is interesting too, when you're at my level, right, working as a support staff person, as part of a Big E school, there's so many levels of organization between me getting to anyone that would actually know that fact. I just don't know. But the one thing I said about this whole run of the book, which I think is valuable for your listeners, is we could talk all day about the culture of sports, from youth sports to college to professional, what's good, what's bad, what should change. And it's not perfect now, but I think what my attitude is, nobody really wants to hear my theoretical ideas of what would make anything better. What I wrote the book based on was, this is the way it is. This is how you can succeed in this world the way it is, right? I think that's where, if you're an athlete right now, that's really what's important, right? If in 7 years the entire NCAA looks different, that's a good conversation. But if you're 17 right now, all that matters is, how many recruiting trips can you take? How much money's on the table for you? How do I prepare to succeed at that level? And that's kind of you can argue that's too narrow a view, but my view is, I've been helping people in our weight room on our campus for the last 20 years get up to this level. I want to make my footprint and my voice louder and get bigger and help more people. So again, nothing's perfect. The NCAA is not perfect, but this book and kind of my soapbox is, this is how you could succeed in it the way it is now.
Angelo, how is strength and conditioning strategy different for the different athletes in different sports?
It's a great question. And it's really not that different at the college level, and I'll explain why. There's been this really big push the last 20 years of strength and conditioning for extreme specialization, right? A baseball hitter trains like this, a baseball pitcher trains like this, a football player trains like this by position, whatever it might be, right? And I think when you get to the very elite, the NFL, the NBA, your Olympic athletes, that's a super valuable concept, right? For the majority of high school kids and for really the majority of college kids, we need just basic athletic development. Okay.
Hmm.
So I always say for the most part as a college athlete, whether what sport, no matter what sport you play, about 75, 80% of what we do can just be teaching the basics, right? Can we do some basic motor patterns? Can we be pretty strong? Can we be in decent aerobic condition to play our sport? And then that top 25% might go to some very specific, let's say shoulder stuff for a baseball player that's throwing 100 times a day or whatever it is, or some different kind of ACL prehab type stuff for a basketball athlete, right? But I think until you get to really that super high level, specialization is not that important. The joke I always make is we live in a weird time where there's so many personal trainers, so many facilities out there telling parents your 13-year-old needs to train like a baseball player and do this very specific exercise, and the kid can't do a push-up yet, can't do a
Mm.
pull-up, can't squat yet. So I think there's definitely a place for specialized equipment, specialized training. All the cool tech stuff we're doing now with GPS and VBT, I think it's awesome. Well, let's get really good at the basics and then do that. Because I feel like one thing, I think my industry does a lot of things well. One thing we drop the ball on, we want to sell the second and third floor of the house to everybody and forget about the foundation. I need to build the foundation a little bit better and then look at how do we build on top of that foundation with more specialization, more tech, more equipment, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I heard you say that. You work with some of these kids, they come in and they don't know how to do a squat. They don't know how to, do some fundamental things. I mean, I'm a soccer player my whole life, but it just seems to me that legs are just so important. I've heard pitchers say, once the legs are gone, I'm gone, and I don't know. I guess it seems to me that that's a more area to work on, but you don't want to isolate one area. You want to try to balance things out, correct?
Yeah. To make it super easy, the entire body's important, right? And we got to train legs, we got to train upper body, we got to train and work in concert with each other and move the body
Mm.
from A to B in locomotion. So I think one thing, and one thing I think is we scream at kids a lot because they can't do this stuff, but it's not really their fault, right? I think most
Mm.
people would agree high school phys ed is not going great in America as far as teaching things, and then we keep giving more kids more reasons to sit down, right? We keep making better video games, better phones,
Mm.
better social media, where nobody wants to get up and move anymore. Like I love working out, but Instagram is fire sometimes, right? We
Yeah.
all kind of know that, right? And
Yeah.
the other thing we do is we specialize earlier than ever before. So now we deal with kids now. They're a baseball pitcher. They throw a baseball 90 plus miles an hour and have never done a squat, never done a push up, never done a pull up. And I think the answer, I'm not saying we shouldn't specialize early, but it does take a couple months out of the year, whatever it might be, and develop some basic motor patterns. And then we can become a pitcher when we're maybe 14 instead of 11 or 12.
Mm. And working out with your own body weight, was it Walter Payton that like never like benched anything until he was in college or
I
something?
think Herschel Walker, I
Or
remember, was
Herschel?
a big. He did like 1,000 push-ups a day. Full
Yeah.
time was in the NFL. Yeah, and and one thing I think most people will agree, COVID was, no matter how you feel politically, a rough
Mm.
time for everybody.
Mm.
But one thing people did pretty good during COVID was when the gyms were shut down. They posted millions of videos of ways to train in your house, right? So I think if you can't figure out a way to do something in your house and pick up a backpack or med, whatever it might be, do some body weight stuff. A gym is great. I think it's really, and if we're going to be realistic, if once you reach a certain strength threshold, you have to go and get some external resistance. You're going to keep getting stronger, right? You got to eventually
Mm.
get a barbell, a kettlebell, whatever it is. But for the majority of high school kids, they can probably start in the garage if they're doing it properly, get a couple weeks or months under their belt there, and then make the transition to a YMCA or a Planet Fitness type place or whatever it is.
How do you because like you said, there's so many distractions for these athletes, Angelo. How do you kind of gamify it? How do you make it fun for them?
We try to make it fun to an extent, but then we also try to lock in when we're there. You know what I mean? My
Mm.
attitude is that we're going to leave your phone in the locker when we're training, and you're going to give me this hour to train by yourself. Now, I don't know if that's with an older population or non-athletic people. I think the fitness games are cool, and then the apps are cool. I think in a team environment, you're probably better off being like, this is like a practice or this is a game. We're going to work together. We're going to be good training partners. We're going to help each other spot, load weights, and function as a team unit, right? Now, if you go home in the summer or when you graduate, you want to use some of the stuff like Strava or Nike Plus or kind of gamify your stuff like that. I think it's great. I really think anything that gets people moving and being physically active, as long as they're not injuring themselves, is a good thing, right? But also, to some extent, there's a time to make things fun, and there's a time to lock in and treat it like a job or a profession or a craft, and there's a time for both.
Mm. The important thing is just to get it done, to do something. I mean, even if you're hurt walking, I know you run about 20 miles a week, I think, and you still love it, don't you?
Yeah, and you know what? I'm always very, very conscious of this. I like working out and being physically active more than probably most people. That's why I picked the profession I did. That kind of makes sense, right?
Mm.
So I understand when people tell me they have a hard time working out. I'm not speaking the same language to some extent, right? But
Mm.
also understand at some point you got to do things you don't always want to do if you want to attain some goals, right? So the idea, and I think that the big thing online now, I see it all over my social media, the meme like discipline beats motivation, right? And
Mm.
I think it's because even me, as much as I like running, I live in New Jersey. It's really cold sometimes. It's rain sometimes. There's snow. There's days I just got a million other things to do. But the idea of I'm going to wake up and I'm going to accomplish X today, knowing I might not feel it, maybe I might want to do some other things, but I'm going to start my day by accomplishing something. I think is super valuable because if we only trained or did things that were important the days we were motivated, we'd all get nothing done, right?
Right.
So I think, I'm sure even for you crank out these podcasts like crazy, which I'm a fan of. But there's days you're fired up, you're ready, you can't wait to meet the guest, and there's some days you're just whatever. I can't believe I got to do it again. But the consistency, someone like you puts out is actually really impressive because every week we're looking for it. Every week we know it's coming, and then over time you build your audience and you build an audience that is upset if you don't put something out, which I think is really the way. And writing is really similar as well, right?
Mm.
The way I attack writing for the fans of discipline, I have a job where some times of the year the first team comes in and trains at 6, sometimes it's 7, sometimes it's 8, right? So I theoretically don't have to be in the weight room until 8 o'clock during certain times of the year. I go to my office every day at 6 o'clock. Every weekday at 6, I'm in my office. If the first team is at 6, I'm training, doing my job with that team. If it's at 7 or 8, I lock the door and I write until the first group shows up. Because
Wow.
I have a 9-year-old daughter. I have a wife that's very busy and has a bunch of pursuits of her own. And if I leave that door open, I'm getting calls. Kids are coming to ask me questions.
Mm.
Coaches trying to meet with me. But if I do it any other time of the day, I can't focus on it, right? So the 2 books I've written have happened between 6 and 8
Hmm.
a.m. on weekdays, and then I start my day and go to my job for Seton Hall. And I think that's one thing. And I'm not feeling it every day. There's some days I get at the laptop and it's like, oh, I can't wait to write chapter X. And I got all these ideas about it. It's flowing. And there's some days it's just like I got to gut out 1,000 words because if I do 1,000 words a day for 90 days, I'll have a book. And I got to just find a way to make it work. And then a lot of that with the editing process, a lot of that will end up coming out. But I think just the commitment to doing that every day is super valuable. And I'm not saying that will work for everybody. You might be a person that doesn't function until 9 or 10 in the morning. But as someone who's a morning person with a very busy schedule, that's the version of it I found that works for me and how I apply discipline to the writing process.
Hmm. And like you said, it's your second book. Your first one in November of 21, Finish Strong, Resistance Training for Endurance Athletes. You make the point of when an athlete starts a marathon, they look very different than when they end it.
Yeah.
So what do you want the reader to take away from in that first book of yours, Angelo?
Well, that came about because I have a background in powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting in my teens and 20s. In my 30s, started running marathons, right?
Hmm.
And just knowing, meeting people in the marathon world, talking to people at races and training groups and stuff. It's a weird demographic of people that will
Hmm.
go out and run literally 20 miles in pelting rain, right?
Jeez.
But are terrified of a lap pull down machine. Have never. It's a crazy thing for so many people.
Yeah.
So me and a teacher I worked at Seton Hall, Dr. R.J. Borgers, he's a triathlete, and the same thing. We would lift weights together and we would run together, and then we got into our early 40s, and like we weren't getting injured like our peers were. We were still feeling pretty good. We were still breaking some PRs, and then again, from a business perspective, it just kind of made there's a million going to Barnes and Noble, and there's a billion fitness books, right? Going to
Yeah.
Amazon, there's 10 billion of them. But my thing was like, no one's addressed this population before. Let me be the first person or the first people with me and Dr. Borgers to do that together, right? So the idea was there's a group of people out there that they're super motivated, super high achievers, and super committed to training, but they're missing this one piece of the puzzle, which is resistance training. So the idea is that again, if you go to the starting line or finish marathon, everybody looks great. Go to the finish line. Everybody's got bad running technique. They're hunched over. You're going to get exhausted running a long race. That just comes with territory. But can we get structurally strong enough to finish a race as strong as we started it? And then the book was successful again because we realized there was this population not being served, and they were kind of able to serve them. And the college athletes were the same thing. There's so many books out there about just general fitness, how to get in shape when you're older, all these other things. Great, a lot of great books. But the idea of let's address this one very specific 3 to 6 month period in your life that is going to, there's a million things are going to change. Take fitness and check that box off. Make that a thing you're ready for, and now you can worry about your academics, you're learning the playbook, you're dealing with your coaching staff, you're going to class, all that other stuff is important. So why add another source of anxiety, which is fitness and strength and being ready to play? Let's write the book that takes it off the table and takes care of that as long as you do the work that the book outlines.
Had you always known you had 2 books in you, Angelo?
No, I didn't really think I had any books in me when I was younger. And you know what the fact of the matter is? I don't think I did. I think there's some people that at 20 or 22 have a lot to say and can maybe write a book people want to read. I think for me and probably the world I'm in, it took 10, 15 years of experience to amass enough knowledge that people would want to hear what I have to say about anything, right? So if to young people listening, I don't say you shouldn't write a book. You might have a lot going on. The other thing I say to people is we make a mistake sometimes as authors. Right? A lot of authors on the show. People that are thinking about writing a book, in my opinion, they get hamstrung by the idea of my first book has to be a masterpiece, right? My life's work. The way I look at it is, I thought that way for a long time, but then about halfway through the first one, no, this is a project. I have a deadline by the publisher to get it handed in on whatever day it is, and this is my first project. My second one will be better. My third one will be better. That's why I say to young people and the athletes I do all the time, just start whatever you want to do. Get started and realize the first probably 100 times you do it are not going to be that good. But start now. Get the clock running now and get the bad ones out of the way, get the learning experience out of the way, figure out the way you want to do it, and then you'll be better at, rep 200, 300, 400, kind of like podcasting, right? The first time you do it, it's a complete shot in the dark. Episode 500, you're kind of locked in, right? But my thing is just start episode, book, whatever it is, one now, and then realize it's going to be bad, and then get better at it as you go through it.
And your process, Angelo, do you storyboard? Do you outline? Do you...
Yeah, for this one, I did it a little bit different. I did what's called a mind map. So it's kind of like an outline, right? You're going to circle in the middle, college athletics, do a couple lines around that, but circles in my chapters. And then I kind of just broke that down to a table of contents, and I filled in the table of contents, right? I kind of, when I do speaking engagement on this, and I tell like younger crowds, it's kind of like I'm making an album, and each chapter is a song. So this week, I'm going to finish this song. Right? Then next week, I'm moving on to the second track, whatever it might be. And then we're going to go back and edit and all that stuff after that. So, and my attitude's always been, if I start writing a book, I want to write everything I can, just get everything out there. And I think that's, for me, that's the fun part. I think that's a fun time for me. And then the editing gets challenging, right? Whether it's me or I could really another editor taking stuff out because you thought everything you wrote was great. And then the piece of advice I'll give to everybody is self-edit as best you can. But in the world we live in now with self-publishing, you can really publish a book without anybody else ever looking at it before you put it up for sale. Now, that's a good and a bad thing, right? The double-edged sword. The good thing is your exact creative vision is available to your customers. That's a good thing. The bad thing is your exact creative vision is available for the world to see, which might not be perfect. So what I would say is get at the bare minimum, get some other eyes on it, get some people with maybe a different perspective on it. So one thing, I'll give you my version of that. The first book I did with a pretty big publisher, right? And they had editors assigned to it, and they made the process very easy. They were great to work with, and they had a very clear vision of this is the way you format and write a book that people want it, that go to Barnes & Noble, want to read. They're Bloomsbury Publishing. It was a great experience. The second time out, I self-published on Amazon.com as really a one-man show because I wanted to get that experience and see how that worked, right? So what I did is I wrote the book from a perspective of a guy with 20 years in Division I college strength and conditioning. And then I let 2 young men, I'll say their names real quick. Phil Almack is a strength coach at a Division III school, Stockton University down in South Jersey. And Michael Perlett is a professor at Montclair State on the academic side of things, doing research and publishing articles, that side of thing. And I asked them to help me out and content edit the book because being at one job for 20 years, you get blinders, right? I only know the way we do things at Seton Hall in the Big East, but having a Division III strength coach and a person on the academic side of things proofread and edit for me gave me invaluable resources of, okay, well, this is the way you do it there, but people might be wanting to do this that way, or it's a different recruiting process than Division II and Division III, and they content edited the book for me in a way that really worked out good for me. So they're two younger guys that got experience content editing, got their name in a book, got a credit, which I think is great for them. And then I got two sets of eyes and two editors from looking at this from a completely other point of view. That I pointed out things I just didn't think of, right? Then I always say get a content editor or someone help you out in that respect, and then it's time to hire a real editor to do grammar and sentence structure and paragraph. I mean, you could probably do it yourself, but if you're not a writer by trade without some training, that's probably pretty hard. You know what I mean? The other thing is when you write, it sounds right in your head because it's your head reading it, right? When you give it to somebody else, they might be confused at a point. They might not understand why this timeline goes in the order it does, stuff like that. So I think at the bare minimum, get it between 1 and 4 or 5 sets of eyes on it if you can.
Yeah, I'm in the final process now of writing a book, and the editors are going through it, and it is painstaking, Angelo. It's just everything. And plus, nowadays you can actually use AI to help as well, which is a great add-on. When people are looking for strength and conditioning coaches, what should they look for?
Okay, I think at the bare minimum, look for some credentials, right? Some letters after the name. I personally think the CSCS, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist through the National Strength and Conditioning Association, is the best one. But there's other ones that are just as good. That's the one I've worked at the organization I work with a lot. But there's a lot of ones out there, right? The other thing I would look at, look at their social media and see what kind of stuff they're doing, see if it makes sense to you. And if you can talk to some of their clients, that's probably the best thing, right? Because social media is everybody's highlight reel. Talk to some people that are in a facility and see what they're doing, and see if. And the other thing I think, look at demographics, right? If you deal with a man or woman that deals with predominantly healthy 18-year-olds, and you're a 58-year-old with a hip replacement, that person might not be the best match for you, right? So find a way that you're going to find someone that knows what's going on in your body as best they can, knows your demographic pretty well, knows your population well, and then try to find a place that you're going to like going to. The worst mistake I see adults make, kids are a little bit different because their parents kind of make them do stuff, but adults will sign up for, like, you say there's a personal trainer area that's just super intense. I'm running a boot camp. Nobody talks when I talk. No headphones, no phones. And you don't like that and don't respond to it, you're not probably going to go back, or it's going to be torture every time you go back, right? But if you like more a guy or girl, it's kind of like, hey, come on in. We're all friends here. We'll talk about the news in between our sets. We'll have fun. And then we play fun music. Like, if that's your vibe, go do that, right? I think that's the kind of way to do it. But pick something. I think a lot of times people think, oh, it's January 1st. I got to whip myself into shape and I got to go to the gym. It's going to be torture. Well, it doesn't have to be. There's never been more times to work out than there are right now. Find something you like, and then you got a pretty good chance of staying with it, in my opinion. The other thing I say to people who haven't trained in a while, that older population, is, especially with the New Year's resolutions coming up, give yourself some time and realize the first couple of weeks or months you get back into being physically active after you haven't for years or maybe decades, it's not going to be fun. You have to establish a base level of conditioning before you can enjoy any kind of workout. So the joke I always make is, if you get winded on the trip from your car to the yoga studio, you're not going to like the yoga, right? But if you force yourself to go enough times and get some conditioning and build some strength and get a little more flexible, a little more mobile, now you can decide, I like yoga, I like Pilates, I like Orange Theory. They're all good. But I think if you just go to something like, I don't like it, no, it's not that you didn't like the workout program. You didn't like that it made you feel terrible because you're not in great shape. Once you get in pretty decent shape, then give it a try and see what you think, and then make an educated decision at that point.
What's your position on martial arts?
And I think they're great. I did karate when I was a very little kid, and then just didn't really stay with it. What I'm seeing now with the explosion, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and all the subgenres of that, I think it's really cool, man. I think we're teaching kids discipline, we're making them physically active, teaching them how to defend themselves in a situation. So it's a kind of thing where, in theory, I really like it, but haven't had a ton of experience with it myself as an adult. Why? What made you ask that?
Similar. I mean, I started doing it. I did get hurt. I pulled back a little bit, but I ended up talking to a lot of martial artists here on the podcast, and I love the direction. I love, like you said, the discipline. I mean, people go and are part of it, and uh, they're actually taught. You're learning how to defend yourself, but you're actually taught to do it less. Now that you understand, you realize that you don't need it. You only use it when you absolutely have to, and you try to get yourself away from it. People kind of have a misconception of it.
Agreed on that. And I think one thing, this is a sweeping generalization I'm going to make, right? As so people, I'm around team sports every day. And
Yeah.
so much of the culture of team sports is I have to go to practice today. I have to go to the weight room. My coach is making me run this test, whatever it is, right?
Mm.
One thing with individual sports like martial arts, where self discipline is a lot more of the focus, I'm seeing now the generation of kids that were martial artists when they were in high school are now coming through Seton Hall and being super successful in the working
Wow.
world because
Wow.
that discipline is self imposed by by the sport or discipline, if you want to call it that, right? Not to keep saying discipline so many times,
Sure.
but I think that's one thing where your swimmers, your cross country kids, your martial arts, where they play individual sports, it holds over a little more than the team sports because you're doing it for yourself more than to be a part of a team, if that kind of makes
Mm.
sense. The joke I always make, man, we will graduate kids in May of, let's say, 2024, and these kids will graduate looking like CrossFit models, just
Huh.
wide shoulders, skinny waist, abs. They look amazing. And then I'll see them at an alumni event 6, 7 months later, and they ate the mushroom on Super Mario Brothers. They got so big. It's just that when that discipline's removed from their life and no one's making you go to the gym, you stop going. If you eat and drink the same way you did when you were playing college sports, the only answer is obesity, right? So I
Mm.
think that self discipline and stuff like martial arts is super valuable and something a lot of kids could probably benefit from.
Angel, has there been anything in the last month or so that you've changed your mind on?
Not really. I'm not sure, but I'll be honest, man. Between my day job being super crazy as this fall semester wraps up, and me being in high gear, not saying no to any microphone to talk about this book, I've had kind of blinders on to the
Mm.
rest of the world. Now, my kind of yearly cycle is I'll take some downtime over the holidays. I got a bunch of books I want to read this break that I have already I'm ready to go at home. Watch some movies, try to learn something. Then I'll try to get back into the podcast and expanding my mind a little bit. My thing is you should always be trying to learn. Everybody
Yeah,
knows that, right?
me too.
But I do think if you have a product out or you have a launch window or you have an in season if you're an athlete, sometimes you got to kind of just focus in on that for a couple weeks or months, do the best you can on that, and then move on to that kind of thing. So off the top of my head, I don't think my mind has changed too much on anything. Is there anything for you that changed drastically in the last month?
I get a wide variety of questions there. I think one of the best answers I got was somebody went from well done hamburgers to medium well. I
Okay.
thought that was really good. But I like to think that I change my mind on any topic given new evidence. There's always new things coming out. There's new opinions, and you never know, especially in the technology
Yeah,
arena.
my favorite cliche on that is that if you're the same person at 40 that you were at 20, you wasted 20 years of your life.
Ugh, yeah. That's not good at all. Yeah, and so you know my story, Angelo. I started my business in the '90s in the tech industry, working way too hard and 14-hour days. You mentioned, people after they graduate, and I graduated. I started the business, and I got myself up to 340 pounds. I'm sitting there in a doctor's office, and she's like, if you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. Scared the hell out of me, so I'm driving home upset. I did this to myself. So I spent the next 6, 7 months, lost 130 pounds, and you can't look at it like a finishing line. It's a lifelong changes. These people that lose a lot and then gain it back, it's terrible for them. But people ask me how, and you've alluded to it many times. Discipline. That's how. There's no secret. There's no secret at all. I got some routine. I got willpower, etc., and I kept it off. How does discipline play a role in your life, Angelo Gingerelli?
Okay, can I say one thing real quick about your weight loss journey? Because every time I've heard you say that 45-second pitch, I think the same thing. And I think you kind of said you did that to yourself, right? Which is, I
Yes.
always applaud people taking responsibility for their health. I think it's
100%.
awesome, right? But
Yeah.
there's other thing that people don't discuss nearly enough, and it's this. As human beings, evolutionarily, right, we're only about 3 generations in to be able to eat anything we want. right? Up
Yes.
until our great grandparents, you woke up in the morning and your only directive was to attain enough calories to stay alive long enough to procreate
Mm,
and not die, right?
mm,
So we're in this, in my opinion, we're in this weird biological evolutionary state of we have our energy and our biology is telling us to eat as much as possible because tomorrow there might not be any food, right?
mm.
While the food industry, the food industrial complex is producing
Ugh,
more fat, sugar, salt, and calories than ever before, while the technology industry is allowing us to move less than ever before, right?
mm.
So the joke I would make, if you go to a McDonald's drive-through for $5, you can expend no energy, and when
Amazing.
your body's telling you to hold on to every calorie of the Big Mac and the milkshake and the fries you put in your body, while you spend the amount of money everybody has in their pocket, no energy, and have access to more calories, fat, sugar, and salt than our great grandparents did in a week of hunting
Yeah.
and gathering for the same amount of food, right? So I am a big advocate of personal responsibility, but I think the obesity epidemic in America, while everyone should do their part to fight it, we have to step back sometimes and look at, well, we're experiencing a thing no other humans have ever experienced before, and there's just going to be obese people because our biology is telling us to do one thing, and the food industrial complex tells us to do something else,
Yeah.
and neither one of those things is great for our long-term health. Do you agree with
Mm.
that?
100%. Yeah. It's expensive to stay healthy, right? Because the food is very good. It's delicious, but it's not good for you. And it's all available everywhere.
It's expensive. It's available everywhere. And then the other thing is our bodies are relentless, right?
Yeah.
Like as we get older, we have less testosterone. We have less human growth hormone. Our metabolism slows down. So it's harder to do the things we did when we were younger and stay active. So that being not making excuses, that in my opinion, means it's time to fight harder. It's time
It's
to
a
have more
factor.
discipline when you go to the supermarket. Time to make
Yeah.
sure you get in the gym the days you're supposed to go and stuff like that. So I think that's a thing I think we need to think about a little bit. But at the same point, I think shows like this that are telling people to take responsibility for themselves are the best thing we could do, right? Because
Mm.
if you don't internalize it and decide to take your health in your own hands, the only scenario is obese, type 2 diabetes, in the hospital by the time you're 40, which I don't think anybody wants that, right? So I think discipline is super important. In my personal life, discipline kind of means always be attaining some kind of goal, right? I just don't do well if I'm not trying to attain something every day. So some days I might just be get a workout in, be healthier today than I was yesterday. Some days it's I need to write this chapter of the book or I need to book myself on this podcast. But I think discipline to me is planning and execution of a bigger goal. And as long as I'm doing that, I'm pretty happy. And if I see some positive improvement, I think it's going well. But I think a lot of people, particularly post college, get in the working world, it's easy to fall into just I go and I punch a clock. Every day is the same as the day before. I'm not working on something bigger. And I would say if you're lucky enough and you have a day job that allows you to attain some goals and maybe be rewarded for that financially, that's awesome. If it doesn't, go find another passion. Go find a thing to pursue and go find some things that really excite you and then be disciplined in the pursuit of those things. Because again, passion, motivation will wane. Discipline stays around a lot longer.
Mm. Planning and execution of a big goal or great goal. It's a great way to look at it.
Appreciate
And
that.
what happens when you reach that goal?
I would, you know what? Same thing as getting a college scholarship. Enjoy it as best you can. Have a
Mm.
couple days, maybe pop a bottle of champagne, post it on social media, and then in a reasonable amount of time, look at the next one. Right?
Mm.
I think because we live in a weird time because you have a great following, but I'm sure some days you wake up, oh man, I can't believe I have this many downloads. But the next minute you're like, well, why don't I have more downloads?
Mm.
Well, it's a
Mm.
weird thing. There's not a lot of finish lines. Writing a book is actually a cool thing where there is a finish line of
Mm.
I had an idea and now I have a physical product, right? So that's one thing I really like about that process. But even the day it comes out, that's really fun. The next day you got to go, how do I promote this? How do I get on X amount of podcasts? How do I get it on a list at Barnes and Noble or Amazon? So I think it's a thing of it's a good and a bad thing. It's you got to be happy with what you did, but then realize that that's a step. Let's keep taking the next step.
It's a really important point, Angelo. Just celebration. I in the business world, I get these goals, you reach them, and then I just move on to the next one. It's important to take a moment, like you said, and celebrate it. No matter how you want to do it, it can be as small as a high five or a fist bump or a bottle of champagne or going on a trip, but just do something before creating the next one.
Yeah, the thing I always think about when I hit a moment like that in my life is, let's just say a year ago, this was unattainable. A year ago, I would have given anything to do the thing I just did. Let me soak that in for a minute, right? Let me relish that and then do the next thing. But I think it's a really delicate balance, right? Because if you're always just happy with just showing up, it's really hard to attain anything, right?
Mm,
But if you're never happy when you achieve a big goal, then that's a recipe for misery too. So I think you got to find what works for you, and the balance between I'm happy with X, but I'm moving on to Y.
mm, What motivates you, Angelo?
I want to put out as much at this point in my career. Wins and losses do right. If our teams do well, I'm really happy for the kids, and
Mm,
I like to think I'm
mm,
some part of that. And then for my own personal stuff, the books, the podcast, stuff like that, I just want to put as much good information out there as possible and impact as many people as I can. Right. So they always say, be for the younger generation when you need it, when you were their age. And I think
mm.
I do a pretty good job at that, right? I really take pride in that, and the idea of that, there's younger kids out there that don't have guidance and don't have mentors. And if I could be some part of that, whether it's one-on-one on campus or online or through the books or the interviews, whatever it is, I think that's super valuable. So that's probably my biggest motivation. And then the other thing that motivates me every day, and I think kind of like yourself, is my family, right? I have
Mm.
a wife that works really hard at her day job, but she's got a bunch of side hustles going on. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and I think being a good example for her and her seeing me be passionate about things and attain things and be physically active every day, being that good examples of motivation every day as well.
Yeah, impact. It's so important, because I know I've been very fortunate my whole life. And if I can give back or just be a part of someone's success, even if it's, 0.5% or 1/4%, it makes all the difference in the world. So given that motivation, how do you measure success?
It's an interesting question. Um, I measure success in if I start a project, I look at my controllables, right? So
Mm,
my controllable this year was write a book from scratch, format it myself, get it available, edit it, all this other stuff, and have a
wow.
book in my hand between. I started December 4th, 2023. The book was available November 1st, 2024. And that was my goal 10 months to go from idea to book, right? We live in remarkable times. You could do that because 100 years ago, that was completely impossible. Probably 20 years ago, you probably couldn't do it. But that was my goal. So I held the book in my hand. I'm like, all right, I succeeded in what I could control. Now, I'm going to market as hard as I can. I'm going to go on every podcast I can. I'm going to do every speaking engagement I can. But whether or not the book sells 100,000 copies is a little bit more out of my hands, right? So I have a
Mm,
marketing idea. I have a plan. I'm implementing this podcast is part of the implementation of that plan. I was saying I really appreciate you giving me this chance, but I think you got to figure out what you can control and then control that as best you can. So the example I always give, if we're going to run a marathon, right, and our goal is a 3-hour marathon, we go out together, we train together, we run a 2-hour, 55-minute marathon, right?
hmm.
We attained our goal. Whether that gives us a gold medal that we won or it gives us a 400th place medal that 400 people ran faster than us, we controlled our pace and our running, and we controlled the marathon, right? We can't control who else shows up at the starting line. So I always say what makes me happy is if I know I did everything I could to make a project successful and I checked all my boxes, that's success for me.
Mm. Yeah, that's wonderful. One of your social media, in Instagram, you're on Finish Strong Book with underscores. But the other is Mr. Fifth Round. Where's that? What was the fifth round?
And man, way back in early 2000s, there was a TV show called Crank Anchors on Comedy Central.
Oh yeah.
And so Dane Cook, the stand-up comic, voiced
Yep.
one of the puppets, and he was calling these houses and making people play this game show against their will. And he would, I'll call you back with fifth round. So me and my friends would just say that all the time. And then I signed up for Instant Messenger, AOL Instant Messenger. So like I'm going to make my name Mr. Fifth Round, and that has just stuck with me for the last 20 plus years of the internet for whatever reason. So yeah, I mean, it was a funny show. Whether or not I still need that to be my handle on everything, you can debate, but that's where that came from.
Yeah, Jim Florentine was the other comic there. He's a very funny
Yeah,
guy.
he's great, man. Jim's one of the best.
Yeah, you're a big comedy fan as well. I saw.
Yeah, man, I like comedy, and then being around people all day and training groups of people every day. If you can make them laugh every once in a while or make a class laugh, I always think it's a good thing.
Has the student athlete motivation changed over the years, Angela? Like, are they similar than they were 10 years ago? You've been there 20 years.
Yeah, I think it's back and forth, right? I think so. I'm going to rephrase that. There's not a real good answer to that, right? I think you always had your kids that were super committed to the program and making them and the team as good as they possibly could. Then you had kids in the middle. Then you had kids who were kind of burnt out already. The one thing I'm seeing is burnout is coming earlier, right? So a lot of times at the college level, your seniors have one foot out the door. And if we're going to be honest, they really should. They should be thinking more about internships and jobs and interviews than their last season if they're going to go out and have a job right away, right? But so part of the challenge is keeping people that are trying to start a career or go to grad school or medical school locked into what you're trying to do athletically, right? But I think what we're seeing now, because kids are taking sports seriously at such a younger age, that burnout point is happening freshman or sophomore year, right? Because they started playing seriously at 12 instead of 15 or 16. So I think that's a thing we got to look out for. And I think that's going to be the next kind of thing in youth sports we really have to address is how do kids get better, right, and develop their skill set, but not have them all ready to quit by the time they hit their 16th birthday. So I think that's a conversation a little bigger than me, but I think that's going to be our next thing.
Yeah, because when I was a kid, I played basketball, I played soccer, I played, a couple other things, some baseball, and now every sport is all year round.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. And as a parent of a 9-year-old, we're dealing with that right now. My daughter really likes softball. She's pretty good. She's a decent player in the league we're in. But I don't know at what point do we say now we got to do softball all year round. Now in the winter we can't do swimming. We got to go to the batting cage. And I don't know if we don't have a recipe for that yet. We don't really know. You know what I mean? But I think we're going to try to figure it out and do the best we can.
Yeah. Angela, thank you so much for your time. I was so excited when we set this up. We have a lot in common. We're probably related, but I really appreciate it. So anybody listening, if they want to get in touch with you, how can they do so?
Okay, if you want to shoot an email, it's angelo.gingerelli@gmail.com. Social media, like we talked about earlier, Mr. Fifth Round, MR, the number 5, THROUND. And then the book is available on Amazon. So if you type in Angelo Gingerelli, there's only 2 books available. They're both mine. Again, like I mentioned several times, I have a 9-year-old daughter. The holidays are coming. If you want her to have a good Christmas, buy the books.
Gingerelli, Gingerelli. We'll make sure to put it in all the show notes. Angela, next time I'm in the New Jersey Seton Hall area, we'll get together and have a cup of tea.
Oh, sounds great to me, man.
You be well. Thanks so much.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with 1 or 2 of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypinz.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.